October 5th, 2011. The sun rose over a quiet home where the man who had revolutionized technology was preparing for his final day. Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple and architect of the digital age, lay in his bed surrounded by the people who mattered most to him. The world outside continued its routine, unaware that within hours it would lose one of its most transformative figures. At 56, Steve's body had been ravaged by pancreatic cancer, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. Throughout his illness, he had maintained his legendary attention to detail and perfectionist standards. Even in his final weeks, he was still thinking about Apple's future, still questioning, still pushing boundaries in his mind, if not in boardrooms. This wasn't how most people imagined the end for someone who had stood on stages around the world, commanding attention with his iconic presentations. There would be no keynote address, no one more thing, no thunderous applause. Instead, Steve's final hours would be intimate, personal, and profoundly human. His family gathered close, knowing this day was different. The man who had taught the world to think different was now thinking about legacy, love, and the mysterious journey that awaited him. What transpired in those final hours would be as remarkable as any product he had ever created. Morning reflections in silence. 6:30 a.m. Steve opened his eyes to see the familiar faces of his wife Lorene and their children Eve, Erin, and Reed gathered around his bedside. His sister Mona Simpson was also there, along with his older daughter Lisa, creating a circle of love that would sustain him through this final day. The room was filled with a peaceful quietness, broken only by gentle whispers and the sound of morning birds outside. Steve's breathing was labored, but he was alert and present. Those close to him noted that despite his physical frailty, there was still an intensity in his gaze, the same focus that had driven him to create revolutionary products that changed the world. Steve had always been a man of few words when it came to expressing emotion, preferring to channel his feelings into his work. But this morning, he spoke softly to each family member, sharing private thoughts that would remain sacred to those who heard them. His words were measured, deliberate, each one carefully chosen as if he were crafting one final product. Lorene later described how Steve spent time looking at each of their children with an expression of profound love and pride. He had always been a demanding father, pushing them to excellence, just as he had pushed his employees and himself. Now, in these quiet moments, it was pure parental love, without conditions or expectations. Around 8 a.m., Steve asked to see some of his Apple products one last time. Reed brought him an iPad and iPhone, placing them gently in his hands. Steve's fingers, once capable of such precise gestures during presentations, now trembled as he traced the smooth surfaces he had insisted upon. It was as if he was saying goodbye to more than just devices. He was bidding farewell to a life's work. The most poignant moment came when Steve closed his eyes and seemed to retreat into his own thoughts. Family members described a look of deep concentration crossing his face, the same expression he wore when solving complex problems or envisioning new products. What was he thinking about in those silent minutes? Was he reflecting on missed opportunities or perhaps marveling at how far technology had come? Do you think visionaries like Steve see the future differently, even in their final moments? Those present felt they were witnessing someone who was still processing the world with the same innovative mind that had given us the iPhone, iPad, and so many other revolutionary devices. When Steve opened his eyes again, he looked around the room with what his sister later described as wonder, as if seeing everything with fresh perspective. The man who had spent his life creating tools for human connection was now focused entirely on the humans in that room, finding in their faces the most important design of all: love. When Genius Whispers Goodbye 10 a.m. brought a gathering of Apple's core leadership team to the house. Tim Cook, Jonathan Ive, and other key executives came to pay their respects, but also to receive what would be Steve's final guidance for the company he had built, from a garage startup into the world's most valuable corporation. The meeting was brief but intense. Steve, despite his condition, still had thoughts about Apple's direction, products in development, and the culture he had worked so hard to establish. His voice was weak, but his passion for excellence remained strong. He spoke about maintaining Apple's focus on simplicity and user experience, themes that had defined his entire career. Jonathan Ive, Apple's chief design officer and one of Steve's closest collaborators, later shared that Steve's final advice was remarkably consistent with everything he had taught them over the years. Never compromise on quality, never stop questioning, and always remember that technology is nothing without humanity. Tim Cook, who had been leading Apple's day-to-day operations, received Steve's blessing to continue the company's mission. Steve's confidence in Cook's leadership was evident even in his weakened state. "You understand what we're trying to do here," Steve told him. "Keep making products that people don't know they need until they see them." The conversation turned to upcoming products and long-term vision. Even facing death, Steve couldn't help but think about innovation and the future. He shared thoughts about directions Apple should explore, markets they should consider, and most importantly, the principles that should guide every decision. It was classic Steve, focused on the future even when his own was measured in hours. What struck everyone present was Steve's calmness about Apple's future. He had spent years building not just products, but a culture and philosophy that could outlive him. "Apple will be fine," he said with characteristic confidence. "We've built something that's bigger than any one person." The meeting ended with personal moments between Steve and each executive. These were private conversations, but witnesses described seeing tears in the eyes of grown men who had worked alongside a genius and were now saying goodbye to their mentor and friend. As the Apple team left, Steve seemed to gain a sense of completion. He had passed the torch, shared his final wisdom, and ensured that his life's work would continue. The man who had once said, "Death is very likely the single best invention of life," seemed to be embracing his own philosophy. "Have you ever wondered what it feels like to know your life's work will outlive you by generations?" Steve appeared to find peace in knowing that Apple would continue to think different long after he was gone. The afternoon brought family time, with Steve's children sharing stories and memories. Despite the sadness of the moment, there was also laughter as they remembered funny moments and celebrated the unique man who had been their father. Steve smiled at their stories, occasionally adding his own memories or corrections with the attention to detail that had made him legendary. Visions beyond the veil. 2 p.m. marked a shift in Steve's consciousness. Family members noticed he was spending longer periods with his eyes closed, but not sleeping. When asked what he was experiencing, Steve spoke in fragments about seeing something beautiful and being amazed by the light. These weren't the words of someone hallucinating due to medication. Steve had always been spiritually curious, exploring various philosophies and practices throughout his life. His adoption of Zen Buddhism, his trips to India in his youth, and his lifelong questioning of existence had prepared him for this transition in ways that surprised even those closest to him. Lorene later described how Steve seemed to be observing something beyond their physical reality. "He would look past us," she recalled, with an expression of wonder, like he was seeing the most beautiful thing he'd ever witnessed. His face, which had been marked by pain and fatigue, took on an almost peaceful radiance. Steve's sister, Mona, an accomplished writer, paid careful attention to his words during these hours. She would later describe how he spoke about patterns, connections, and designs that seemed to exist beyond the physical world. "It's so beautiful," he whispered repeatedly. "The patterns, they're everywhere." Was Steve, even in his final hours, still seeing the world as a designer? His comments about patterns and beauty suggested that his innovative mind was still working, perhaps perceiving organizational principles that governed existence itself. It was as if death was revealing the ultimate user interface. Around 3 p.m., Steve made a request that surprised everyone. He asked for his old sketches and notes from Apple's early days. Reed brought him a box of materials from the garage days, including rough drawings of the first Apple computers and handwritten notes about his vision for personal computing. Steve's hands shook as he looked through these artifacts of his younger self. Here was tangible evidence of how far he had traveled from those humble beginnings. The crude sketches of early computers seemed almost quaint compared to the sleek devices that now connected billions of people worldwide. "We actually did it," he murmured, looking at a particularly rough sketch of what would become the Apple II. "We put a computer in everyone's hands." It was a moment of profound satisfaction for someone who had spent his life trying to democratize technology and empower individuals. The most emotional moment came when Steve found his original notes about making tools for the mind. This had been his core philosophy from the beginning, not just creating gadgets, but developing technology that would amplify human intelligence and creativity. Looking at those faded words, he seemed to realize he had succeeded beyond his wildest early dreams. Do you think innovators can see the full impact of their work while they're creating it, or does perspective only come at the end? Steve appeared to be grasping for the first time the true magnitude of what he had accomplished in changing how humans interact with technology. As the afternoon progressed, Steve's breathing became more labored, but his spirit seemed to soar. He spoke about seeing his adoptive parents, Paul and Clara Jobs, and thanking them for giving him the foundation that had made everything possible. Family members felt they were witnessing not just a death, but a transformation. The final hour of wonder, 5 p.m., brought the golden hour, with warm sunlight streaming through the windows of Steve's room. This natural lighting seemed to energize him briefly, and he opened his eyes with remarkable clarity. What happened next would become part of Silicon Valley legend. Steve looked at each family member present and spoke his final coherent words. According to his sister Mona Simpson, who was holding his hand, he said, "Oh, wow! Oh, wow! Oh, wow!" These weren't words of pain or fear, but of amazement, as if he was seeing something extraordinary that filled him with wonder. The repetition was so characteristically Steve. When something impressed him, he would often repeat himself for emphasis, whether praising a product design or expressing excitement about a breakthrough. Even in death, he maintained his distinctive way of communicating profound appreciation. Family members described a look of absolute awe crossing Steve's face. His eyes, which had been heavy with fatigue throughout the day, suddenly became bright and focused, as if he was witnessing the most incredible presentation of his life. What was he seeing in those final moments? Lorene later reflected that Steve's final expression reminded her of how he looked when he first saw a breakthrough product design, completely captivated and inspired. "It was the same look he had when we first saw the iPhone prototype working," she shared. Pure wonder and excitement. The room fell into a profound silence as Steve's breathing gradually slowed. There was no struggle. No apparent pain, just a gentle transition as his life force began its final departure. Family members felt they were witnessing something sacred, a soul leaving the physical world with grace and dignity. At exactly 6:30 p.m., Steve Jobs took his last breath. The man who had spent his life creating magical experiences had crafted his own final moment with the same attention to beauty and meaning that had characterized his greatest work. His last word, "Wow," seemed to capture a lifetime of innovation and discovery. In the moments immediately following his death, something remarkable happened. The room remained filled with a sense of peace and completion rather than overwhelming grief. Family members later described feeling that Steve had found what he was looking for, that his journey was complete. Have you ever been present when someone passes away peacefully? There's often a feeling that the person has simply moved to a different state of being rather than ending completely. Steve's family experienced this profound sense that he had graduated to whatever comes next. As news of Steve's death began to spread beyond the family, the first tributes started appearing. The man who had revolutionized personal computing, animated movies, digital music, mobile phones, and tablet computing had completed his final project, a death that inspired as much as his life had. When the world held its breath, the news of Steve Jobs' death spread across the globe with the speed of the internet he had helped shape. Within minutes of the official announcement, social media platforms were flooded with tributes, memories, and expressions of loss from people who felt a personal connection to the man who had transformed their daily lives. Apple stores worldwide became impromptu memorial sites. People gathered outside, leaving flowers, apples with single bites taken out of them, post-it note messages, and photographs of Steve. Many lit candles and held vigils, creating a global network of mourning that spanned continents and cultures. The technology industry lost more than a competitor or colleague. It lost its North Star. Bill Gates, who had been both Steve's rival and collaborator over the decades, issued a statement calling him an amazing human being, whose impact would be felt for generations. Other tech leaders echoed similar sentiments, recognizing that Steve had elevated the entire industry. World leaders, celebrities, and millions of ordinary people shared stories about how Apple products had changed their lives. Musicians talked about how iTunes and iPods had revolutionized their industry. Filmmakers credited Pixar with transforming animation. Designers praised Steve's influence on everything from architecture to automotive design. The most touching tributes came from everyday users who described personal moments with Apple products. A grandmother learning to video chat with distant grandchildren on an iPad, a student using a MacBook to create their first film, a musician recording their breakthrough song on GarageBand. Steve had reached into individual lives in the most intimate ways. Stock markets around the world reacted immediately, with Apple shares initially falling before rebounding as investors recognized the strength of the foundation Steve had built. The company he co-founded in a garage was now the most valuable corporation on Earth, a testament to the power of his vision. Perhaps most remarkably, the tributes transcended technological boundaries. Even users of competing products acknowledged Steve's contributions to advancing all technology. He had raised the bar for everyone, forcing the entire industry to prioritize design, user experience, and innovation. The outpouring of grief was unlike anything seen for a business leader. People mourned Steve as if they had lost a family member, because in many ways they had. His products had become extensions of themselves, tools they used to create, communicate, and connect with others every day. What does it say about someone's impact when their death is mourned by billions of people who never met them? Steve had achieved something rare. He had touched individual lives on a massive scale, creating personal relationships through the technology he designed. The night of October 5, 2011, millions of people around the world looked at their iPhones, iPads, and MacBooks with new appreciation. They realized they were holding pieces of Steve's imagination, physical manifestations of his relentless pursuit of perfection and his belief that technology should be beautiful, intuitive, and empowering. In death, Steve Jobs had created his most powerful product launch yet, a global moment of reflection on how one person's vision can reshape civilization. The boy who had been given up for adoption and found his calling in a garage had become immortal through the tools he created for human advancement. October 5, 2011 marked not just the end of Steve Jobs' life, but the completion of an extraordinary human journey that had transformed our world. His final day revealed the same intensity, thoughtfulness, and attention to detail that had characterized his approach to everything from product design to business strategy to personal relationships. Steve's last hours demonstrated that even in death, he remained true to his core philosophy of simplicity and elegance. There was no drama, no extended suffering, just a peaceful transition that reflected the Zen principles he had embraced throughout his life. His final word, "Wow," captured the wonder and amazement that had driven his lifelong pursuit of innovation. The gathering of family and Apple leadership on his final day showed how Steve had built something bigger than himself. He had created not just products, but a culture of excellence that could continue without him. His confidence in Apple's future proved prescient. The company has continued to thrive and innovate, guided by the principles he instilled. Steve's spiritual awareness in his final hours suggested that his curiosity and quest for understanding extended beyond the physical world. The man who had spent his life exploring the intersection of technology and liberal arts seemed, in the end, to be exploring the ultimate frontier, consciousness itself. His peaceful death surrounded by loved ones contrasted sharply with his often intense public persona. It revealed the private man behind the public figure, someone who, despite his demanding nature and perfectionist standards, was fundamentally motivated by love. Love for his family, love for his work, and love for humanity's potential. The global reaction to Steve's death demonstrated the unprecedented personal connection he had forged with people through technology. Millions mourned him, not as a distant celebrity, but as someone who had personally improved their lives through the tools he created. This may be his greatest achievement, making technology truly personal. Steve Jobs left behind more than products or a company. He left a new way of thinking about the relationship between humans and technology. His vision that technology should be intuitive, beautiful, and empowering became the standard for the entire industry. Every smartphone, tablet, and user interface today bears his influence, his life story, from adopted child to garage entrepreneur to global icon, proved that individual vision and determination can literally change the world. He showed that business success and artistic integrity need not be mutually exclusive, that products can be both profitable and meaningful. The man who once said death is very likely the single best invention of life, because it clears out the old to make way for the new, became in death a catalyst for reflection on innovation, creativity, and the human potential to create meaningful change. Steve Jobs' final day was a masterpiece of human dignity, family love, and visionary completion. He died as he had lived, with intensity, purpose, and an unwavering belief in the power of great work to make the world better. His last wow reminds us that wonder and amazement should guide our lives, just as they guided his. Today, billions of people carry Steve's vision in their pockets, use his innovations to create and connect, and continue to be inspired by his example of what one person can accomplish when they refuse to accept the status quo. He may have taken his final breath on October 5, 2011, but his influence on human progress will endure for generations to come.